Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Costume Society of America. We thank you for joining today's webinar on writing abstracts. In our new series, Conversations on Dress, we're really excited to have you guys here. We ask that you could remember to mute your microphone and turn off your camera because it improves the streaming quality. So if you could help us out with that, we'd appreciate it. We are broadcasting live, but this content will be recorded for everybody's knowledge and will be available to view afterwards through our YouTube channel. You'll receive, since you registered for the webinar, you'll receive a notification once it's up on YouTube. Should you have any questions for today's speakers, please put them into the chat box. And if we could reserve the chat box just for those questions and keep the fun chatter down, even though I know some of you are excited to see each other again. Should you have any general questions regarding the CSA digital content, please contact Conversations on Dress at CostumeSocietyAmerica.com. So without further ado, let's welcome, well, I'm the moderator today. Sorry, I didn't read that through, did I? And I'll let you in on who our presenters are. So I'm Dr. Lalon, and I am down in Texas. I teach fashion there, but I'm really excited to have Denise Green and Jean Parsons and Michael Mamp joining us today. And I assume I'll start to see them here pretty soon. There's Denise. Jean, Michael, oh, everybody's here. So Denise Nicole Green is an associate professor of fashion design, anthropology, and American Indian and Indigenous Studies at Cornell University, where she also serves as director of the Cornell Fashion Plus Textile Collection. We also have Dr. Michael Mamp, who is a professor in the Fashion Merchandising and Design program at Central Michigan University. Welcome. And finally, Dr. Jean L. Parsons, who is a professor at the University of Missouri and curator of the Missouri Historic Costume and Textile Collection. Apologize. Got lost in where I was reading. Want to make sure I didn't mess anything up. So we're going to take a quick look. I'm going to briefly just explain the abstracts, where to find them and what to look for, and then we'll immediately start into some great questions with our panelists here today. So if you, I guess go ahead, Graham, if you would let me screen share. Can I do that?
You should be able to screen share, Lalon.
Okay, I'm looking for the button and I apologize. Webcams. I must not have, oh, because I'm looking on the wrong screen. This is what happens when you have two screens. My apologies. There we go. All right, let me move you guys out of the way. This is how I teach as well, just so you know. It's always a little flyby. So when you're on the website, this is our main landing page. Once you go to National Symposia here at the top and Upcoming Symposium, click on that. That will take you to our Salt Lake City announcements page, where you can see our beautiful cover art there, and then scroll down to Call for Papers. So once you click on that, you will click on the click here to view Call for Papers. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm on Firefox, so I have to bring mine up. And so just a very brief walkthrough. That we have this, great wording up here about we're looking for some fabulous new research. The theme of this year's conference is Crossroads of Dress and Adornment, Creativity, Culture, and Collaboration. It's a nice broad theme, but we want to embrace everybody here. And so we are looking for all sorts of fun, interesting stuff. So there's just a few suggestions, but we're certainly not in any way limited to these suggestions when you read this, and some information on how to contact the committee should you need to contact us. So we've got different types of submissions, which we will go over in just a minute, but I did want you to see this particular document because this document houses everything. Once you decide, hey, I want to submit in the research presentations, you can look at the different subcategories It's giving you a brief information on what the format is and how to submit. And you'll see in here there's a hyperlink. So the hyperlink will take you to the rubric, which may or may not come up on my computer. There it goes. So it's downloading again. So that will bring up your rubric. I'm not going through that right now, but just so you know. And then the submission site. So once you click on that, that will load you into the place where you can actually submit your work, which should take it a second. There we go. Maybe. There we are. So it will walk you through. Sometimes things, once you click on it and tell it what your option is, it will give you more. So you'll see that things start to show up as you populate these fields. So with that, let us quickly go back here. For each one of these, we have a separate submission site. So for all of the research presentations, there's one submission site and one rubric. For the in process, there's one on each. So all that information is physically here in the document. When you contact National and say, how do I submit? It's in the document. Where's the rubrics? It's in the document. All right, I will cease sharing and hand that back to Graham. And while we're waiting on that, basically we'll start into looking real quickly at what is an abstract. I assume, Graham, you're working on getting up the PowerPoint, correct? Maybe. There it is. Fabulous. Thank you.
It's loading slowly. I'm sorry. I'm getting the school.
No, mine was a little slow too. We got to wing it, right? All right. So just briefly looking at what an abstract is, we're looking to summarize the paper. And of course, our panelists are going to go into this more in depth. But make sure that you're including your research questions, argument, and purpose, especially the so what factor. If you've been through graduate school, you know the so what question. It's just as pertinent here. Be sure to include your methods, your study design, sources, very important, used to answer research questions and address purpose of study, and we're going to kind of briefly look at that. And your findings, analysis, and conclusions. These are all asked for in various ways according to the type of abstract. You can go ahead and switch. While that's coming up, it may just take a minute, but we'll keep it moving here. There are two main categories.
Do you mind if I just jump in real quick? So I added these slides, and I just wanted to make sure I know that this session today we're talking about writing a CSA abstract for the conference, but I wanted to just make sure everyone was aware. In my role as Vice President of Publications, we also have our journal dress, and the abstracts that are submitted for dress are slightly different than the abstracts that you would submit for the conference. And so I just wanted to point out that clarification here, that when submitting an abstract for a paper versus a conference, there's a slight difference. And for dress, it's always important to look at the instructions for authors, which is available on the Taylor and Francis website, which you can access through our CSA website, as well as the Taylor and Francis portal, which is the publisher for dress. And so while we're going to be talking today about conference abstracts in the particular, I wanted to just make sure everyone was aware that the abstracts that are written to accompany papers, especially those submitted to dress, are actually much shorter. They're about 100 to 150 words is the requirement, and that these abstracts for papers are what are indexed. And so it's really important in that brief summary to capture your paper, because often it's what people have access to reading. It's not behind a paywall, it's open. And so it's such an important part of sharing your work, because that's going to determine if people want to read the paper and also how it comes up in different indexes. So That's why I've added this slide here to just clarify that difference while we're focusing today on the conference abstracts, that there are also abstracts, of course, that we write for papers, which are going to be different depending on the venue and the journal. And so it's always important to just check the instructions for authors wherever you're submitting, whether it's dress or another journal, that the abstract is always tailored in terms of word count and other things to the journal. So,
Jean or Michael, do you have anything to add at this point?
I would say, as an editor for CTRJ, I would just say yes to everything Denise said. In addition, and I don't know about dress right now, but the abstract is what goes out to reviewers to help them determine whether or not they are comfortable reviewing the paper. So the abstract needs to be very clear when you're writing it for that paper, just like it does for a conference.
We did have a quick pop-up question of what is the so what question, and I apologize for making assumptions there. That's just essentially, why is this important to the rest of the world? So why should people care about, you know, your research besides it's just your love?
And I think I would add to that, additionally, it's about how does this research add to or expand our body of knowledge related to the study of dress or the history of dress? And is it contextualized within a framework that also recognizes the other work that's been done on a similar topic or on the same topic? And how does it expand to or add to that work that has been completed in the past?
Fabulous, thank you. Graham, you're welcome to move to the next slide. So just so everyone sees what we are asking for this year with the National Symposium, we've divided into 5 basic categories of research presentation, in progress research, panels or discussion sessions, a design exhibition, and then finally the professional development workshops. So each of these have their own criteria with them, and you can certainly read more in the call for submissions. Essentially, research presentations are your classic research paper podium presentation. In progress invites those of you still in the middle of your research, especially students, grad students, anyone who's budding in that area. We want to hear about your work, with even knowing that it's not finished at this point. Panels and discussion sessions are great, like what we're doing right now. So this would be a great panel or discussion session for the symposium. The design exhibition is physical work. So if you are, you have some designs of some sort that you would like to submit, we're welcome to do that. And then finally, the workshops are really how-to learning sessions that we do a few before and after the symposium. And of course, I'm sure we'll have more questions on that, but I do want to get to the questions for the panelists. If we could move ahead on the next slide. So the submission criteria, just really briefly, short bio and headshot, and that has nothing to do with the jury process. That just has to do with our logistics of when we get to, setting up the proceedings and things like that. So that is always kept separate from the process. It is blind juried. But you can upload everything, of course, your abstract, all of that in a PDF format. That's the easiest to work with. You can have 4 images for any of the areas. The only exception is design exhibitions can have up to 8 images because, of course, it is more visual. And it is open to CSA members and to non-members. We are welcoming anyone who is not a member if you would like to. We want to hear about your research. So there is the email. I'm not going to spell that out for you guys, but you can also find it in the call as well. That actually comes to me, and then I filter it to the abstracts coordinator or to the design exhibition coordinator if needed. I'm the one who's in charge of the good workshops. But all right, so we had a quick rubric, but let's move on. I like moving on. So how-to tips and tricks. Could each of the panelists give us some insight on what you would say are some just general, basic, good, hearty tips and tricks for submitting abstracts to CSA?
Well, I'll jump in. I think it's the more I thought about this, the more I decided it's really the same writing tips that you would have for just about any other kind of academic writing. But one of the things that I really want to read is I want to know the purpose up front. I don't want to get partway through an abstract in order to find out what the actual purpose of the research was. And I think Michael covered the other one, which was the importance of that context, that contextual review, knowing what else has been done, because none of us work in a vacuum.
And thank you, Jean. I would add to that, I think having a pretty snazzy, catchy title is always exciting, especially for a conference too, because if your paper is accepted, it'll be on the list. And so you want to draw attention to it. Obviously, you want that title to capture what it is that you're doing, but kind of capture attention. And so you can use those first couple of sentences to really get into what Jean was saying, really specifically outline the purpose. But one of the tips I was going to suggest to the group is today we have 55 people on this call together. We have an amazing community of scholars to share your work with your colleagues. Before you submit your abstract, have a colleague read it. With my graduate students, we always are sharing abstracts ahead of the deadline and giving feedback and doing kind of round robins. That's really helpful, and it makes writing a less isolating experience too, I think sometimes, and also helps you to see what you might have overlooked. If there was a body of scholarship that really does need to be referenced in your work and you happen to miss it, having more eyes on your work before you submit, the better. And then always asking someone who's not a subject content specialist, read it over to make sure that there's not jargon that is incomprehensible to someone who may be well versed in the study of dress generally, but perhaps not in that particular area. They may be a juror. Are they able to understand what it is that you've outlined? I think it's really good to have more eyes on your work. As we all know, in the writing process, you can get so wrapped up that it's hard to see some of the big pitfalls that you've made. And then, of course, the process of reading your work out loud. If you don't have someone to share it with, that's always a good trick to ensure that the writing flows well. I also wanted to say that Tina Bates, who is our editor for Dress, she wanted me to share a couple tips too that she suggests. She says to make your abstract spicy. She says write it long, then get rid of anything that doesn't sing. And so, make the abstract compelling. And of course, as I mentioned for Dress, the abstracts are much shorter, and typically you don't have as many sort of references in an abstract for paper. But for the conference abstract, you really want to make sure that you've got your references included in Chicago style, that you've done a thorough review of the literature and really contextualize your work, as Michael said. I don't know if Michael has something to add too.
I would say that for me, I learned the hard way that writing a really good abstract is actually really hard, because you have to summarize a whole lot of information in a very short amount of space. What is the purpose of my study? What's the so what behind it? Do I have adequate primary and secondary sources? What is my analysis and conclusions? And I oftentimes find myself reading feedback that I've received from a juror thinking, oh my gosh, you want me to do that too? I've only got, whatever it is, 500 words or 300 words to be able to write this abstract. So my tip would be recognize that it's hard, give yourself adequate time to do it, because I think effective editing of the abstract is important. And we all struggle with time management. And since I've been living in time soup land, it's even more difficult to manage your time. But try to get this done in advance so that you can have some time to let it sit and then come back to it and read it again. Because I think that's really helpful to make sure that you've done the best job that you can in getting a lot of information in a tiny little one-page piece of paper.
And since we do have...
Sorry, Denise, I was going to say I would put one final tip, if there's people out there who are relatively new to CSA or aren't CSA members, is kind of a know the conference, because different conferences have different styles of writing that they expect. So it's helpful to know something about what kind of writing is already occurring for that organization.
And with that, I would say that CSA, in my opinion, is, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. We have high expectations around what we expect as an organization, I think, in comparison to some other conferences that I've submitted abstracts to where the acceptance rates are much higher. So it is competitive. So you shouldn't, you know, it took me a while. It took me several rejections before I got my first presentation accepted at CSA. So don't feel bad if you get rejected. Try to learn from the experience and understand the conference, like Jean said, as you're writing, because it is somewhat more competitive with a lower acceptance rate.
And I was just going to add, as Michael said, we only have so many words, but the benefit of our conference is that we allow for images. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, that's 4,000 more words. But in all seriousness, the images are important and help to illustrate your work. So if that is relevant for your abstract, we would strongly encourage the inclusion of images that help to illustrate your work. And this may help to do some of the work that tight word count might feel a little oppressive. Let the images speak to a certain degree. That might be a nice hack around that challenge.
Great, thank you all. Our next question has to do with common pitfalls. You've all been jurors as well as submitters. Have you seen any odd things that show up that people need to be aware of and make sure you don't include?
I would say very quickly, and something that shouldn't have to be a pitfall anymore because of the way the categories have been reorganized. I would say the biggest pitfall is work that is clearly not, research that's clearly not been finished. And you can read that into, you know, lack of findings or thorough analysis. And so I think submitting an abstract before you've really finished your project, you're like, oh, the conference is a year away, by then I'll have it done. And so that is a pretty common pitfall. But what's wonderful is that this year we have the category for research in progress. And so if you feel like you have a project that is in progress, literally, this is why we have this category, so that you don't have to feel like you have to sort of make it fit into a finished project if it's not actually finished yet. And so I think that's a common pitfall, is reading abstracts that are clearly not quite completed research.
I would say, since I look at a lot of papers, well, I've looked at a lot of abstracts, but I also look at a lot of papers as CTRJ editor, do what several people have already said, which is have somebody read it for you and edit it. I mean, and it applies to me too, because we all think we know what we're being perfectly clear, and sometimes we're just not. So having another set of eyes, or two or three, it's really important.
I think I would also say, and I think this was alluded to earlier, but so I'll just reiterate that, and it's hard to be aware. I'm not aware of all of the scholarship on every topic, but part of your job as the researcher for your particular topic is to make sure that you have, as much as you possibly can, well versed yourself in the subject matter. And reach out to those individuals who have published in a similar vein as you, and perhaps those are people that can also edit and read the work for you before you submit it. But I think a common pitfall that I see both in abstracts for, I don't know what word to use other than traditional written research, design scholarship, is that we don't cite each other. We're not aware of the work that has already been done. And I think that is important to reiterate for the design work as well, to make sure that we are aware of people who have worked with a similar purpose or with similar techniques or with similar technologies, and cite those people as a part of your work, because a common pitfall is that the person who has submitted the work doesn't give an impression well enough that they're aware of the other work that's already been done in the same area.
I agree, Michael. I've read design abstracts where somebody claims to be the first one to be working on something, and I can tick off all kinds of other names. So it's harder to find some of the design scholarship, I think, sometimes. But it's just as important in the design scholarship to make sure you know who's come before you.
And for those that are, you know, in academia and utilizing exhibited design scholarship, for example, as an achievement for tenure and promotion purposes, the more we continue to build the body of knowledge by citing each other and calling each other out, then it becomes somewhat, hopefully, easier to make a case as to why this should be considered as scholarship, equivalent to a publication.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention as well, it kind of goes back to the so what question we were talking about earlier, really making a case for why your work is important and makes an important contribution to the field. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when I see someone say, oh, there's a gap in the literature and therefore I'm filling this gap and that's their answer to the so what. There needs to be a little bit more than that, right? Of course, we want to fill gaps in the literature, but what is it about your work that is distinctive, new, offers new insight? Why is it important? Maybe there's a gap for a reason, you know, so kind of that's not quite going far enough in answering that so what question. So really making a compelling argument for why this work matters, why it's relevant, why it's important that we learn about it. Not just because nobody's done it before, but there's got to be a little bit more than that to answer the so what.
Particularly if you bring up that gap and somebody's sitting in the audience who has written on it, correct?
Or the reviewer for your paper. And to Michael's point as well, the papers are paired with reviewers who are subject experts. And so if chances are that your paper could be reviewed by someone whose work you probably should have cited. So that's something to consider too, is that the jurors are experts in the area as well. And so they will be aware of the literature too. And so that thorough literature review is really important. And of course, it's not a full paper, but there is space in our abstract submission. We have enough of a word count and space for citations to allow people to do the proper kind of citation.
That brings us to, we had a quick question, we'll just fit it in here because it's along the same lines of standardization with CSA and national, and that we kind of changed a lot over the years of what we say are categories and how we jury them and along those lines, and that we realize that at national that's a problem. So the official statement on that is we're working on it. We're attempting to form a national jury committee and to have some consistency going from one year to the next in the symposium so that it is more standardized and you know what to expect. It's not going to be a surprise every year. There may be, of course, tweaks and changes as we figure out some issues and try to make it a better experience for everybody. But essentially, we're working on it. Oh, go ahead. I thought I heard somebody start. Sorry. Let's move on to rebounding from rejection. Michael, you brought this up earlier. Do you want to expand a little bit on this?
You know, I think that we get very caught up in our own mind and our own work and probably our own ego. And it is somewhat making yourself vulnerable, putting something that you really poured yourself into out there for somebody else to critique. And I think in the beginning, I probably did take it very personally, more personally than I should have. But it took me a couple of fails before I learned that that was okay. And that doesn't mean, and I've published and exhibited quite a bit now. I still get a little anxious when I'm getting ready to submit something thinking, is it good enough? So the rejections, the feedback that you get, I think help in the end ultimately to make you a better scholar, a better writer, a better researcher, and don't take it personally. And I think because I've been on the receiving end of some reviews, whether it be a paper or, you know, a piece of design work or an abstract for a conference, that have been kind of snarky. So I really try to, when I'm reviewing, to be honest and to give good feedback and to point people in good directions, but I try to keep that in mind. So I just bring that up because I think whether we're a reviewer or whether we're someone who's submitting our work, don't take it personally. And if you are a reviewer, remember that there's, you know, a human on the other end of that feedback that you're giving them.
And I will say, to sort of expand on the reviewer comments and things like that, I've gotten rejected like we all have. And you know, I think for all of us, the initial response is, well, they clearly didn't know what I was trying to say. And I've discovered that, in fact, sometimes I didn't know what I was trying to say. And I usually set it aside, let it sort of sit there for a while and come back to it. And I had a paper, this was actually a publication paper. When I came back to it, I realized that the reviewer was actually giving me insight into my design work that I hadn't come to on my own, and it had completely changed how I was approaching what I was doing. So sometimes those reviews can be incredibly helpful because it is that extra set of eyes that helps you rethink what you've probably been doing like this for a while.
Yeah, I'll second that. The reviews, again, when you first get them, it can be a bit much, but ultimately, a number of people have invested their time, energy, and intellect in reading your work and providing you with thoughtful feedback. Hopefully the tone is not, you know, of course we've all had the snarky reviews too, and that can feel deflating. But at the core, we all are passionate about our field, and we want to see all of the scholars in our field excel and elevate our scholarship. And so people have invested a lot of time in reviewing your abstract and have provided feedback. And so that feedback is so valuable. Just like Jean said, it can help to reveal things that, you know, when you're so close to something, you can sometimes overlook things. And so, you know, sometimes when you make a big argument or you're putting something out there that, you know, you're going out on a limb, maybe you haven't had the evidence that you needed to strengthen that argument. The reviewers are going to call you out on where the holes are, and that's really valuable information. So I would say you always rebound stronger if you're willing to take the reviews and really synthesize them and build upon them.
Great, thank you. We had a real fast question from the audience. Do citations count towards word count, which is a nice simple answer. I like that one. It's changed from year to year, but we're of course, well, we've always done Chicago style, but this year the bibliography and the endnotes are not counted in the word count, and that's listed out in the call for you all. We've had somebody ask if we can go back to the slide on images, and maybe Nicole could start off since you brought that one up and talking about images in the abstract, how that works.
Sure. So I just suggested that because so much of our work is visual material, that images are really important. When it comes time to publish the conference abstracts later, you'll really need to, you know, make sure that you have all of your copyright secured and permissions, because those get published. And in conference presentations, those images as well need to be cited and credited. And if you take your own images, obviously that's going to be best practice. But images do a lot of work in the abstract, and so I think they're of value in our field in particular. I think when we were talking the other day, I think Jean had some things to say about images as well. So I'll turn it over to her.
Don't remember, but I just think they're, well, I would say going to design abstracts, I think it really helps to support the case of the design research you're doing to see work in progress. So not just the final finished pretty images, but also to see how you got there. I think, Michael, you'd probably agree to that, I think.
Totally, yeah. Documenting your design process and having the opportunity to share that as a part of your submission would be a really good best practice. And, you know, every organization is different, but in my experience, CSA likes pictures. So if you can use pictures in your submission, I would encourage you to do so.
And when I've read abstracts,
and I'll just put in a plug for
images, I'm always sort of a little put off, I have to say, if there's clearly a place where there should have been an image. So I'm sorry.
And I just want to put in a plug for that. No, that's okay. Just putting in another plug for Dress, which of course is our organization's journal, which is full color, beautiful, glossy pages. And so images are almost even more important when you get to that paper stage, because we have this wonderful publication where we can have full color. So.
Fabulous, thank you. We're in the last 20 minutes of our session, so let's move to some audience questions here. We have from Adam, how should I include the methodology in my abstract? Explaining methodology takes from my already limited word count, so I generally haven't included, but then I get flagged by reviewers for not explicitly stating it.
So if it's okay, I'll start with responding to that. And let me first say that my answer is I don't have a perfect answer, but my best advice would be that in our field, to me, methodology is implied in that we're all pursuing usually something related to the study of the history of dress. Maybe or maybe not, but for the most part, it's history of dress, or it could be different in another category like design, where you still might be referencing historical concepts or ideas or inspiration. But I don't necessarily look for the person who's submitting the abstract to say, I applied this method. I look at the source list to make sure that they have an adequate representation of primary and secondary sources. And that implies to me that this scholar has applied the historic method in a correct way, that they have enough information from a variety of primary and secondary sources to plausibly make an analysis of what occurred. And that is the historic method. So for me, it's more about looking at the sources and evaluating the sources than literally writing a sentence that says, I applied the historic method. I think, however, if you did something that was more specific, if you went back and looked through, you know, a ton of old images or portraiture and applied a content analysis, then perhaps I would call out that specific methodology as a part of your explanation. But in general, if you're just doing historic method, I would focus on making sure I have good, robust sources.
I agree, Michael. I think I want to hear a little about sort of the study design, how you maybe use those sources or how you follow them. And I think in this day and age, there's so much digital material out there, and the sources that we have available have just expanded exponentially. So I do like to hear where you pulled things from, where you know, did you examine a particular archive for photographs or images or diaries or whatever. But that's, to me, that's your method. I agree, the historical method, unless you very specifically said, I did content analysis to organize the study.
Yeah, and I would agree, you know, in the intro, in the first or second sentence, as we've talked about, the purpose of the study is there. We want to know the so what, the why, what are you doing? Perhaps that's in the form of an argument statement or a purpose statement. It also might be in the form of a research question. And so we're looking to make sure that the study design and the methods that were used are appropriate to answer the research question that's been presented. And so that connection between what you're doing and then the methods that you've used to address that question. And so I am an anthropologist, so I often use ethnographic methods and ethnographic fieldwork. And I do tend to explain that, but part of that is that my source material is not necessarily in an archive. If I'm doing an ethnographic project, I might say I spent 2 years doing participant observation research in this community. So there may be some more explanation depending on the method. But that's really just to illustrate, once again, what is the source material, because that source material is what produces, it produces your findings. The analysis that you conduct is based on those sources. And then I think how that analysis is conducted, of course, as well, because now we have things like AI, right? And ways of reading large quantities of images. And so there are new and emergent methods as well that may take a little more explanation, but this is where the citation component can come in as well and help you to kind of cut down maybe on that word count a little bit as a sort of shortcut. If you're trying, you don't have enough space to explain in depth AI, machine learning, for example, you could then cite, say, some papers that have used this method. That could be another way to sort of shortcut it. But I know this is a complex question, and like Michael said, there's not really an easy answer, but the source material is really important to have an understanding of.
One more thing that I just thought of on this idea of methodology and talking about it in your work. I don't know if this is true for others, but I've recently, in several different venues, been asked by reviewers of my work or pushed to try to incorporate theory more into the scholarship, trying to contextualize the work using, for example, feminist theory or queer theory or critical race theory. And that was hard for me because it isn't something that I think it is more and more emergent that we're in grad school trying to get grad students to apply and utilize theory more frequently in this field. But it isn't something that I was certainly challenged to do that much in grad school. So pushing myself to think about how can I maybe use a particular theory or a relevant theory to help contextualize this work, I think ties into methodology and is something that I've noticed I've been asked to do more and more recently.
Interesting.
Just recently with a publication that we had in Dress, I really appreciate the reviewers who pushed me to really think about feminist theory in relationship to the Gibson Girl, and I think it resulted in a much better piece of work.
Fabulous, thank you. We have a question from Lulu, and she asks, although CSA doesn't require them, I am frequently asked for keywords. I find this very challenging. Do you have any tips and tricks for keywords, even though we don't ask for them?
Well,
but we do ask for them. Yes.
Oh, there you go.
And journals, I'll ask for them. We ask for them at CTARJ also. They're how people find your work. So it's really important that you create keywords that are searchable and that aren't so generic that it won't pull up what you're doing. So they have to be relatively specific. I find them hard to, pick out of the work sometimes to decide what's the most critical keyword, but it still needs to be something that if somebody's searching for work, that yours will come up. Right?
Anything else to add?
I would say that keywords, Jean is right, as is always the case, and keywords, and keywords, for me to say that, and keywords I think tie back to that so what question. So what is the main point of what I'm trying to do here? And I think the keyword is an opportunity for you to make that point even more clear, and to make sure that that point is the searchable word or idea.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're really straightforward. If you're writing about a specific designer, then that's one of your keywords and that will bring up that work. But if you're, you know, if you just use a generic word like design, that's not helpful.
And we, for dress, you're required to submit 5 to 7 keywords for any paper submission. And so again, this is all for indexing, and it's what enables, facilitates searching and, you know, accurate identification of your work in search engines. So yeah, it is a one.
Important.
I think helps to solidify what it is that you want to be known for as being your expertise, because then when somebody searches that word, if you use that keyword in a couple different publications that are focused on a similar topic, then your work comes up in a search that when someone's doing a literature review.
Thank you. It might be worth noting at this point too that the editor of Dress does scout our symposium for potential articles. So one is meant to lead to the other, hopefully. All right, let's do, so I think there's sometimes confusion between design research presentations and the design exhibition. Could you kind of explain the difference, particularly as it has to do with the abstract?
I can start to try, and then please jump in. So there are a lot of similarities, actually. It is more similar than it is different, and it should be, because it's all scholarship. And if we're executing our creative practice as a form of scholarship, then we're approaching it in the same way, where we're asking questions like, is this just a pretty dress, or does this add to our body of knowledge in some way? Does this help us understand a particular creative way of creating in a different way? Does this help us understand how to apply a particular technology in a different way? How does this expand our knowledge base? And then again, that ties into citing the other work that's been done before you. So when I do something with digital textile printing, which, you know, is kind of old news now, but I still do it, I have to cite Jean. I mean, you can't do that work in digital textile printing and not cite Jean, because she's the mother of that vein of scholarship. So I think that the abstract process of thinking about how to contextualize your research, how to cite others' work, as we've already talked about, is actually all the same. I think one thing that might be different is that there's a bit more sharing of what your process was, you know, how you executed your process, how you perhaps went back and changed your prototype or developed your prototypes or changed your outcome or evaluated your work. That might be a little bit different, and the wording around that a little bit different than what you would typically write in the other abstract. But then again, maybe it's not all that different. But to me, the point of my message is that they're more alike than they are different.
Well, I would say, Michael, yeah, I agree. I very much agree. I think for me, it's more a decision as a designer in terms of which format I choose. So if I just have a piece that I want to exhibit, I might choose the exhibition side. But if I want to talk about a body of work or several pieces that have been building on each other, then I'm going to do it as a research presentation. So it is also, I think, my decision in terms of which direction I go and what I want to talk about or show.
I think that's a really good point, and particularly when you're building a creative practice or design scholarship. You know, I've been myself working in this vein now for about 10 years, where I use a lot of words and embroidery and create these textile surfaces. It's about time that I put that together and either publish it as a paper or maybe present it as what my creative practice has been for the past decade. And in that instance, I would do what Jean was just saying and submit it as a research presentation versus just a singular item exhibit.
And I think the same thing could apply to other kinds of design exhibition that we see, which is recreation of historic pieces, because you learn a lot about process through that. So in some cases, it might fit better with a single piece that you're shown, but in some cases, it might fit better with an ability to show more information, or maybe you did more than one piece and you want to put it all together in a presentation.
Great.
And I think the research.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add quickly that the research component, it is design research. And so outlining, there may be a problem statement, a challenge, a research question you'd hope to answer through the design process. And so including that, and as was mentioned, the iterative nature of that process. And because you can submit up to 8 images, you can show some of that iterative process, because that reveals a lot about the overall research process, how you got from this problem or a purpose that you needed to address all the way to a finished design. All of that in between is where the learning occurs. And so that's really important to share. What was the problem you were trying to address, or the research question that was the impetus for this body of design scholarship, or a singular design piece? Thinking of it in those terms and thinking about what other scholars have done in that area is important.
I guess we have a panel of people who do both design and history.
That's why we chose you. Part, one of many reasons why we chose you. So I think we have time for one last question. Oh, was I talking? Go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say really, really quick that one other thing about design abstracts is really position it and think about it the same way as you would if you were writing up a summary of your written research. You know, if your design abstract is starting with, I was inspired by the sunset at the beach, then think again about how to contextualize, how to position, how to talk about where your work fits into the body of knowledge in the same way that you would if you were writing about a historical topic.
Great, thank you. We'll slip in one last question here before our hour is done. I'm a student and just starting out with research. Do you have any suggestions or tips for me?
I guess
anyone.
It depends on the level, I think. I really encourage it at the undergraduate level. We do a lot of undergraduate research at Cornell, and so I work with a lot of undergraduate students on independent studies. So I think finding a faculty mentor is a great place to start. And that faculty mentor, for example, I have a number of students I work with on research, and we meet collectively. Well, now we're meeting on Zoom collectively, but pre-COVID, we would meet together collectively to share work and talk through different challenges, obstacles that had arisen. I would also recommend taking a course in research methods at your school or your college or your university. That's always helpful to understand what other fields are doing, because we're in an interdisciplinary field. While many of us are trained in history, some of us are trained in anthropology, others have, PhDs in fashion. And so we have a really multidisciplinary field, and there are a lot of different research methods that are available to us, and really figuring out how to tailor the method to the kind of question you're attempting to answer, or the area of research you're interrogating, really understanding what's going to be the appropriate method. And what other disciplines are articulating with this area I want to study. And so I think that's kind of an important place to start, is to find faculty mentors, or maybe graduate students that maybe further along in their degree, they'll have a kind of perspective that will be very revealing too, and understanding the challenges and obstacles that others have gone through. And that kind of shared community, I think, is a great place to start, is to find a research community. And I think that's what's so special about CSA, is that we are a large research community. And so we have a wonderful forum where people can ask questions, the email forum, and that's a great place to meet people. So if you have an area you're interested in, you can use our forum to sort of understand from our membership. There's so much knowledge in our membership. And so you may not be able to find a mentor at your school. Maybe you find and develop a virtual mentoring relationship with someone. When I was a sophomore undergraduate, I found a copy of Susan Kaiser's Social Psychology of Clothing in the library and went home and spent the next 2 days straight reading it. And then I just sent her an email and told her how much I loved her book. I was 19 years old or something. And she was so kind. She wrote back, and we've had an amazing mentorship relationship ever since then. She wasn't a professor at my university. I just sent her an email because I liked her work. And so there's a lot of creative ways you can find people. And it's even easier today because we have lots of different platforms to do that.
I think we're all open to chatting with anybody out there, student or not student. Let's face it, we all like to talk about our research. So, if you're interested, don't hesitate to reach out to someone at another university, at another museum, wherever. We're a friendly group.
I agree. And I really love working on research projects with students, whether they're undergraduate students or graduate students. My former student Joshua and I, who's starting his grad program at Iowa State this fall, just published an article in Dress that I was talking about earlier. You can read that. Nostalgic Elegance, the Enduring Style of the Gibson Girl. Josh and I worked on that paper for 3 years, but it was really a fabulous learning experience. And that started, my advice to that student would be don't give up, because that started as a 2-page paper in a 200-level undergraduate history of dress class. And 3 years later, it's a publication in Dress. So we love working with students. Find a mentor, and I'm sure that you'll have lots of great success on your journey.
And CSA has a mentor program. So I don't know if you've all received the email that was sent out recently, but there is a mentor-mentee program that CSA is running. And those terms are relative. I feel like I may be an associate professor, but I still look to a lot of mentors. So I'm still a mentee in many ways. And I'm also happy to mentor people, students and other junior scholars along the way. But we have this really wonderful program in CSA to try to connect folks to create connection.
Yeah. Thank you all. We have one really fast question, which I think we can answer real quick. Is there any reason for a work in progress submitter why you should choose a poster or the Pekakucha option? And I think that's just a personal preference on whether you like to verbally go through that formal presentation style, or if you'd rather have more one-on-one contact with a poster presentation. It's just, there's not an advantage or disadvantage to either. It's a personal preference.
I might actually, I really like the poster presentation format, I think, for feedback, because you do have this sort of constant stream of individuals that come through during the poster presentation. So whereas with a singular presentation, everyone asks the questions in the last 5 minutes or whatever, and then everyone leaves the room and goes to the next thing. The poster presentation is a little more free form, and so you might have the opportunity to really have in-depth chats with people about your work. And for work in progress, I think that's really the advantage of sharing work in progress, is getting meaningful feedback that's going to enhance the work as you develop it.
Fabulous, thank you. Those are great words of inspiration to end on. We are right at the top of the hour. Thank you to all of our fabulous panelists, Denise, Jean, and Michael. Thanks so much for agreeing to this and to being here and being part of our community. And What's the cat's name?
That's Tiny.
Oh, Tiny. Mine was behind me on the pillow for a little while. Luckily, he didn't try to make much of an appearance. But if you have any more specific questions about the call for submission process, email the abstracts coordinator. Like I said, I'll actually get that, but I will forward it to the correct person to be able to answer your questions. And we just really look forward to seeing you guys on our next webinar as well, next Wednesday at 7 Eastern. Graham, can you plug the next one?
Yeah, next week we will have our first episode of Dress and Drinks with Leon Webbers and Laura from the Vermont Historical Society at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you haven't registered for that one, please do.